In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, one God. Amen. Glory to Jesus Christ. I'm going to do something that I've never done before. In my email this week, I received a sermon I preached, years ago. And it was so good. So I'm just going to repeat it. I've never done this before. I feel a little guilty, like I didn't earn my keep this week, but here we go. The gospel always gives us a glimpse into Christ's great good heart. The Lord reveals to us His Father's gracious will to heal and save all creation by living among us as an incarnate life and demonstrating in living color what it is that the Holy Trinity desires. The disciples reveal their impurity of heart by condemning the Syrophoenician woman in today's gospel. They did as their upbringing had taught them. They were conditioned to hate her, a Gentile and a woman. The woman was not only acting improperly by approaching the Lord as she did, she was a Gentile and doubly to be avoided. So Jesus at first was silent, which probably pleased the disciples, but obviously they hoped for a stern rebuke, since they asked for it by name, saying, "Send her away." They were annoyed. And when Jesus made His famous reply, "I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel," the disciples must have been overjoyed. At last, Jesus got it right. He was standing up for His religious and ethnic heritage. But the Lord's next remark, I'm sure, sent them into paroxysms of delight. "It is not fair to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs." Now, I have something interesting about this word dogs, which isn't in this sermon. Jesus does not use the normal word for dogs. He uses a diminutive word for dogs, which means little dogs, the kind of dog that people kept in their homes. Otherwise, how could the dog wait for the crumbs from the master's table? He was using an affectionate term for dogs. We don't know that in English. It doesn't come across. He was not so much scolding her as teasing her a little bit, showing her a little bit of love, and then what comes next is amazing. In this, Jesus sought to reveal two things in these comments of His, one tragic and one divine. He made an example of both the disciples and the woman. The disciples for their cruelty and lack of faith, and the woman for her humility and spiritual beauty. Her replies echoes forever as an example of pure love and faith. "Yes, Lord, yet even the little dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table." And Jesus answered her with practically a hymn. "O woman, great is your faith. Be it done for you as you desire." You see, the only thing that really matters is humility. It doesn't matter who or what you are or what you have done. Humility opens the floodgates of divine grace. The gospel points to the way of life that pleases God, not the way of the disciples dictated by fear and bigotry and hatred. These are indicators of sin, sure signs that self-interest is the motive. The way of the Syrophoenician woman pleases Jesus, the way of extreme humility and love. She was there for her daughter, not for herself. In her, there was not 1 ounce of self-interest. Her ego had been destroyed by the suffering of her daughter. The great enemies of ego are faith and love. She shows tons of both of these things. She approaches the Lord without regard for social convention, begs Him to help, accepts His rebuke with a display of unprecedented faith, calls herself a dog, a great insult in Middle Eastern culture, and this Jewish man she calls Master. So how can we know we're on the right track? Humility and love. It is simple. They will know we are Christians by our love. And love is not words alone. Love is action. Words are cheap and actions speak loudly. But it must be humility and love in its most radical form, extending even to our enemies, to those who abuse us and wish us harm, which is no small task. Olivier Clement, the great Orthodox theologian, explains it like this, and I quote, "The key to spiritual progress is therefore evangelical love for one's enemies. This is first of all something very simple but very difficult. The refusal to judge, the refusal to assert oneself in despising or condemning others. Only such an attitude of mind brings detachment and peace. The rest is secondary." All that our Lord did and said was for love. His great good heart was always open. Is it not obvious that everything we do must be done for the love of God and our neighbor? Without humility of heart, we cannot love. We must first realize that our neighbor is Christ with us and that our actions will take on a holy character. We will seek all means possible to lift up the other, to bring joy and peace and comfort to the other, to humble ourselves before the other as before the Lord Himself. Anything other than that is born of pride and self-interest, the two progenitors of all evil. It was said when I wrote this sermon a while back, by some out there in the big wide world, that our community is perhaps a little too welcoming, a little too friendly. But how can a community following the example of Jesus Christ be too friendly? We could not possibly out-friendly Jesus, who died for all of us while we were yet sinners, and the Father who makes the sun to shine on the good and the bad alike. I reject the idea of exclusion, just as Jesus did, who broke down the walls every time He spoke to a woman, or ate in the house of sinners, or saved an adulterous woman from death, or reached out His hand to heal on the Sabbath day, or told a parable featuring a Gentile, or touched an unclean leper, or drank from Jacob's well from the hand of a Samaritan woman, and who was also a sex addict, who healed the favorite servant of the centurion of Rome, who spoke out against the pride of the self-righteous religious, who challenged the Pharisees and stood up for those they condemned. He was the one who lifted Zacchaeus, cared for the Syrophoenician woman, healed the woman with the issue of blood and the blind man on the road to Jericho, forgave Peter when he was betrayed 3 times, restored the apostles who forsook him in the garden, encouraged the sorrowing Thomas, who was honest enough to express his doubts, elevated Paul, the murderer of Christians, and asked God's forgiveness for all those who crucified Him, and those of us who still do. The truth, the bottom line is that if we are not people friendly to a fault, then we are not God friendly at all. We are to lift one another, not tear one another down. The Lord warns us not to try and separate the wheat from the tares. He tells us not to extinguish a smoldering reed. It is not our job to determine who is worthy of our love. It is our job only to love. Everyone is worthy of that. We must be very careful that in our zeal we do not place barriers between ourselves and God by causing others to suffer. The truth is that we have little time in this life to spare. The call to purity of heart demands that we concentrate our spiritual efforts daily, even as St. Paul writes, incessantly. It is so easy to get trapped in personal delusion and get sidetracked into counterfeit forms of life. I don't know if you, this is not in the sermon. I don't know if you saw the video about the man who had a party on Super Bowl Sunday. Did you see it? Did you? What he did was he went, bought all the supplies he needed, jerseys, chicken wings, everything you could find, and went out into the streets and found 3 homeless men and invited them to the party, which was on the top in the club of one of the skyscrapers in Boston that they would never have been able to get in without him. And they celebrated the Super Bowl together. And at the end, there were lots of hugs and kisses. If that doesn't tell you what love is and what Christ is about, I don't know what could. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.